Hello again. I'm back. This is week 3, lecture 2, part 2, and my apologies for the interruption. Um, Left off with Julius Caesar had been proclaimed himself dictator. And the fact that he proclaimed himself dictator for life upset a lot of people. Because all of a sudden, this is a crisis for the Republic. Dictators were okay and expected for times of crisis, like with Sulla. But when you say, I'm going to be dictator for life, he said, wait a minute, that is denying the authority of the Senate, where the real power supposedly had been. It's denying the Republican form of government. That's not right. That's not being Roman. We've been a republic since 509 BCE. They didn't use those dates, obviously. And there was a lot of opposition, and one of the most outspoken critics of Julius Caesar was a man by the name of Cicero, Marcus Tullius Cicero. And Cicero had been consul in 66 BCE. So he's a politician, a statesman. He was a lawyer. He's most famous for a lot of legal defenses. In some ways, especially one trial, he famously writes how he pulled the wool over the Senate's eyes, the jury, Senate's eyes. There's my dog coming back in. Sorry. And got someone off who he knew was guilty. But he became the greatest author of Latin prose ever to have lived. Cicero was something. He was a philosopher, a statesman, a lawyer. It's hard to overestimate the importance of Cicero, the significance of Cicero. And he was a very staunch opponent to Julius Caesar. Spoke out viciously against him. And the problem became by the opponents of Caesar, what do we do about this? Now, Cicero starts to conspire with like-minded people. Other senators who also were concerned about all of this. Wait a minute, Julius Caesar comes in here and just who does he think he is? He's just a general. And he's now proclaiming himself dictator for life. We have to get rid of this tyrant. He's a tyrant. And Cicero also talked to a friend of Caesar's, or at least someone who was fairly close to him, a man by the name of Brutus. A relative of 500 or 450 years earlier, whatever it was, I'm not doing the math in my head all that quickly, of the Brutus who had been part of the overthrow of Tarquin. And Cicero says it's the same thing. Make your family proud. Let's get rid of this tyrant. Now, if you've read Shakespeare's play Julius Caesar, it's the famous thing because Brutus and a group of senators on March 15th, the Ides of March, 44 BCE, so 5 years after Caesar crossed the Rubicon, in the Senate, assassinated Julius Caesar. And Caesar, supposedly, according to Shakespeare, as he lay dying, being stabbed, saw Brutus, his friend, and he says, Et tu, Brutu? Or Et tu, Brute, I think they say, and Shakespeare said, but this Brutus is fourth declension. Anyway, you too, Brutus, even you. And they killed Caesar. You might think, great, wonderful. Now what? Another triumvirate was established, the second triumvirate, which included Julius Caesar's nephew, Octavian. Octavian eventually ended up asserting his authority and power. But that is a story I'll get to shortly. One of the other problems at this point in time, in terms of the fall of the Republic, was not just Caesar causing problems, not just the unrest in Rome with the general population. It was also the increasing reliance of Rome on slaves. They have their slave society. And Rome was increasingly becoming a slave society where the economic structure of Rome, and here again meaning the extent of Roman hegemonic control, the Roman Empire in that terms, even though it's still a republic, was based on slave labor. Slavery has been there throughout human civilization, but there have only been a very few civilizations or cultures whose economic structure was based on slave labor, and Rome was one. It was becoming that, emerging as that, because what do? As you keep expanding, how do you get just problems with the military, with citizens, with how do you get labor to do the groundwork? Well, one way is to, people at places you conquer, enslave them and make for slaves. So there is this tension between, let's say, this increasing slave population in Rome, the common people tension who are free, or Rome, the increasing of citizenship in Rome. With rights and privileges comes with citizenship. So all of a sudden, to be a Roman citizen, slaves are not citizens, but an increasing amount of common people are being proclaimed legally as citizens with rights and privileges, rather than an original group around Rome, the Roman farmers. And society is falling apart and crumbling. And how do we maintain order? How do we maintain justice? Which is, for the Romans, associated with legal structures and laws. And this society becomes very problematic. So that's just another factor that led to some of the problems, divisions, which we'll see that were to come. Now, when we go to the next slide, we begin to see that there was this period from, let's say, 44 BCE with the assassination of Julius Caesar for the next 37 years, or 27 years, 17 years, 17 years, this period of transition during which Octavian, nephew of Julius Caesar, was able to establish his primature, his authority within the triumvirate, to establish in 27 BCE what historians refer to as the Principate. Because what Octavian did was, after basically defeating his other two triumvirs, as they were called, was to say, okay, now I'm in control. I'm thoroughly in control. By 27 BCE, I am now, unlike his uncle, I'm giving authority and power back to the Senate. He knew Sulla. He knew Roman history. And for doing so, especially after the problems with Caesar, the assassination of Caesar, everyone said, oh my gosh, Octavian, that is so fantastic. You are so marvelous and wonderful. You are absolutely august. Now, August, we know, number one, is a month in English, August. It also is an adjective. August means splendorous, fantastic. That is how the Latin word Augustus means. It means splendor, wonder. And that is what they started calling Octavian. Now, Octavian said, fine, I'll be Augustus. Here's another thing I'm going to do, because I gave power back to the Senate, but I'm going to take on my uncle's name, Caesar, Julius Caesar. He adopted me, Augustus said, as his son, even though I was his nephew, but he adopted me as his heir, appointed me as his heir and son. So it was legally, Caesar wasn't stupid. I didn't think that he was actually the father of Octavian, but he said, okay, I'm going to legally make you legally my son and my heir. And so I'll be known as, Octavius Caesar. And Caesar was August, so he became known as Caesar Augustus. These were all names before they became titles and offices. In 27, after giving power back to the Senate and after being hailed as August, he said, I will simply be first citizen. I will not have any special powers or offices, returning in principle theory power to the way it was before, saving the republic, which had been so beloved. And so he goes, but I'm going to keep one title for myself, namely chief priest, Pontifex Maximus. Because Augustus knew if I can really control the religion, what people believe, I'm there. So I'm going to rule by influence, not by office. And this rule as first citizen in Latin would mean princeps. Princeps means first. So Caesar Augustus would be the princeps, our word for prince, to rule what's been called the principate. Now, he didn't refer to it as principate. That's what historians call it because it's actually an unofficial rule of a single person through authority, power, charismatic authority. There's 19th century on into early 20th century German sociologist Max Weber who talked about different types of authority, and one is charismatic authority, which is not the same as institutional official authority of office. It is the oh my gosh, that person is so great, that kind of authority, and Augustus was able to pull that off. That is the beginnings of what we refer to as the Augustan Revolution, because all of a sudden we have a principate, the authority, even if it's based on charismatic authority, of a single individual, even though the structures of the republic remained. So how do we manage this? And how, Augustus knew, do I transform Romans' understandings and beliefs that they accept my power and authority? One of the things he did was, because he had his critics, certainly, and Cicero was one of those, and Augustus had Cicero arrested, executed, and his tongue cut out. And he nailed his tongue to the rostrum in the forum, as it had been said. He later kind of said, yeah, well, no, he was a great man, but anyway. But he went about this program of transforming the ideology of Rome from this republican form to an imperial form. So we talk about from empire to empire. Now, as Augustus, in 27 BCE, Rome had been an empire for a couple hundred years anyway, as a minimum, in terms of hegemonic control. But what's happening in this revolution is its transformation into an imperial form of government, which Augustus affects, or Octavian, now known as Caesar Augustus. How did he go about doing so? Well, propaganda and image making. I've left one up there, even though I have it there on the slide. Propaganda and image making, the Roman coinage, an image of Augustus, and Augustus as patron of the people. That's all very true. But a major aspect thereof, which could be part of the image of Augustus, that I didn't have, and I should have listed this as a separate one, is he proclaimed Julius Caesar, to be a god. He said, you know what? Okay, not only am I adopting his name, so I'll be known now as Caesar, now as Augustus Caesar, or Caesar Augustus, the August Caesar, which is again is a family name to begin with. If only it had been named Sock, it would be Augustus Sock, or Sock Augustus. I would never want to be that, but anyway, that's the point I want to make, is that Caesar is a family name and Augustus is an adjective. He says, I am going to proclaim as Pontifex Maximus Julius Caesar as a god, meaning that he became divinized. Now, this was a very common ancient understanding that human mortals could become divine. You can see that already with Utnashpatim in the Epic of Gilgamesh going all the way back, but that was not unheard of. There are other people who had been seen as so fantastic that they became a god, became immortal. And Augustus says Caesar's immortal. And I am Caesar. And if Julius Caesar is a god, and if I am the son of Julius Caesar, even if adopted, but still son of Julius Caesar, then I am son of a god. I almost have this divine attribute of me as part of the aura of what I'm trying to present, because if people can see me as related to a divinity, that's pretty special. Now, as part of this image and the propaganda in image making. Now, the term propaganda has a bad name because of the Nazis. Propaganda in Latin is simply that which is to be spread, to be propagated, sent out, spread. We can see in some ways this part of this Augustan revolution, Augustus's program as being the first really conscious program of propaganda to consciously strategize about how do we change people's minds and beliefs. Proclaiming Julius Caesar divine as one, making that kind of part of the Roman religion, relating himself to Caesar as the son of now a god. And then he wants to make sure that everybody knows who he is and what he has done. He began systematically putting his image on Roman coinage. Now, you can say, well, isn't that just normal? No, it wasn't in Rome. There had been commemorative coins with emperors and generals, and Caesars on some. But in overwhelming majority, Roman coinage did not have images of rulers or politicians. But with Augustus, he makes it a principle from this point on that the coinage, or namely the money for the empire, all had his image on it. So people would see, I get money. Augustus. Where do I get the money from? Augustus. It's a one-to-one relationship of money and power, and political power, and imperial power. So that is one thing he did. He also established, he said, what do you mean established? I thought he didn't have any authority. He had a lot of authority just within the structures of the Senate, which is, of course, he's not claiming that he has special authority. He's just saying, can you do this? Of course, we're going to do this. But every city within the empire was required to have a statue of him displayed in public in the city square. But not just any statue. There's a particular image. I forget if the textbook has a picture of it, but it's the very famous image of Augustus as this young conquering hero, strong, vigorous. And he established an official workshop in Rome to make these images or carve these statues. And then the official statues would be sent out, or they would have workshops in the provinces around, but they had to be officially approved. And they could only produce this officially approved statue or image of Augustus. And this continued even when he was old. So he would no longer fit the model, which he may have in 27 BCE, of this strong, vigorous warrior conquering hero. That was the image he projected even after that was no longer reality, if it ever was. So that's the other aspect of this, his image. His coinage, image, proclaiming himself the son of Julius Caesar, and divinizing Caesar as being Julius Caesar as a god, and then showing how much he loved the people. Augustus is patron of the people. He spent his own money to pay for games, for entertainment, to pay for food and distribution of alms for the poor and everything. And he tried to make sure that everybody thought he was so wonderful and great. And he also wrote about himself. He wrote his great deeds of Augustus in the third person. But he was the author. Also, this spread. So this was part of his image and propaganda to this text about the great deeds of Augustus. Patron of the people, father of his country, the first citizen, having returned power, all power to the citizen. Oh, I don't have any power. Yeah, okay, fine. I'll be I'll be Pontifex Maximus, but that's not really. It's like, proclaiming Julius Caesar as a god, therefore I'm a son of God. But that's not really power. I'm not usurping power. I'm not like a dictator here. Ha ha ha. But that's what he was. Effectively, that's what he was, and he did it by these means of image and the creation and control of the image that would affect how people viewed him in public. Now, he always had critics, even as he does win over the population by and large. And he does establish effective Roman rule. This is the beginning of a period of Roman history that becomes known as the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, because at the height of Roman hegemonic authority, that's what basically, I mean, it's not quite there yet, but it's almost there. That's what Augustus ruled over. And no, was there absolutely pure peace everywhere? No. All along the borders is always fighting. But for the first time, there were not, for a long time, there was not a major campaign going on. Peace, prosperity, strength, virtue, divinized view of himself, and others viewed him in that way. Sort of semi-divine, if not divine, almost himself. And then another aspect that he said was needed for this, we have to write a new history of Rome. We don't really have a history of Rome, actually. So we need to write one that will also show how Roman history culminates in me. So it's okay, I'm going to do this because if we can, memory, as I've said before, history is memory. And if we can shape the memory of people of Rome, the history of Rome, isn't that important? So he had heard about this poet named Virgil, who was gotten a lot of beginning to make a lot of press, get a lot of notoriety. Virgil had written these called pastoral poems or eclogues, and famously in the fourth eclogue, he in this poem he had prophesied, or the poem prophesied this coming of a new ruler, a new figure, a child who would be grown up and issue in a golden age. Augustus said, that's me. I can use Virgil. I mean, he may not have said that's me, but he may have said, I can use that. I can use that very well. So he commissions Virgil to write a new history of Rome. And Virgil does. It is one of the outstanding pieces of Western literature, or even world literature of all time. It's known as the Aeneid. And I'm kind of surprised, but I don't have even the title written out there, the Aeneid. It's an epic poem. And what basically Virgil did, of course, he's a struggling poet. Of course, he's going to accept the commission and do what he does. And we could spend a whole semester studying the Aeneid. It's such an amazing work. And Virgil becomes the most outstanding author of Roman poetry ever to have lived, or of Latin poetry ever to have lived, just as Cicero became the most outstanding author of Roman prose who ever lived. So we have Cicero and Virgil. We'll see these names later on in the Middle Ages and Renaissance as being held up as the models, and they really were, because it's amazing if you studied what Virgil actually did with the language. Just as Shakespeare, if you really study Shakespeare, it's like it blows you away what someone can actually do with language when they have that kind of facility over it. But the point here is the story. What did Virgil do, and what did he write to write this new history of Rome? He rewrote Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey, which had become a basis of education, of culture, of Greek, just like the Romans borrowed Greek religion, they borrowed Greek philosophy and tried to Romanize it. They also borrowed Greek literature and tried to Romanize it. So rather than the Greek side of the story, Virgil tries to tell the Roman side of the story. Whereas Homer, as I tried to stress, these were not poems that he sat down and said, oh, what am I going to write about today? He's writing, if it was a he, and if there was only one person, he or she, whatever Homer was writing. So, well, he's also blind. How did he write? Okay, when dictating, whatever. It was putting it in this form. Stories that stemmed from time immemorial for him already about the Trojan War, including Tiresias and everything else. Oedipus was not part of the Trojan War, but these old oral tradition stories. That's what he puts into form and gives it kind of sets the story from that point on. Virgil creates this all new. He's not appealing to oral tradition except for Homer, but Homer had already been set, basically. And Virgil is this brilliant creation. He says, okay, I'm going to write about the Trojan War. I'll take the side of the Trojans. Because Rome was founded by the Trojans. This is the story of the Aeneid. Very briefly, very, very, very briefly. And God, I would love to have assigned it. And I thought about it, but I thought, no, I'd rather have you read the Republic and look at justice and the question of justice. But it's an amazing work, the Aeneid. It's about Aeneas. Aeneas was a Trojan hero. He appears in Homer as a relatively minor figure. And what he did, Aeneas fled Troy, and he was told he was also semi-divine. Venus, Aphrodite, was his mother, and Theseus was his father. So he was part god anyway. And he was told, he says, leave Troy and take the Trojan gods before Troy is completely demolished. And leave Troy. This is a divine intervention. He's been told, you have a mission to go and found a new city in Italy. You need to go to Italy, establish this new city, and bring the Trojan gods. And so as Troy is burning, Aeneas takes the gods, i.e. the statues and things. This is what we're talking about. As he carries his older father Anchises on his shoulders out of burning Troy, to found this new city, there is no greater example of being a pious Roman, a pius, a pietas, than Aeneas. Family, father, religion, gods, Trojan gods, state, the founder of a new city. And this was all to be prophesied by Jupiter. Now, this goes back. Aeneas was trying to get on his journey. What did Odysseus do? Odysseus had problems getting back to his home in the Odyssey. And Aeneas did too, because Hera, or Juno in Latin, Hera is Zeus's wife, and Juno is Jupiter's wife, was really upset that she wasn't picked. So there's no way she's going to be supporting the Romans. Venus, or Aphrodite, who was picked, is the mother of Aeneas. So Aphrodite is supporting Aeneas to go found this new city, and because of the tensions between Hera and Aphrodite, or between Juno and Venus in the Latin version of it, Juno tries to prevent Aeneas from getting where he wants to go, and the kind of part of the early part of the Aeneid is with the first books is Venus complaining to Jupiter. It says, is it your prophecy for my son? Is it your predictions for my son's fate going to be fulfilled, or are you going to change it? Because it doesn't seem like he's making very good progress. He goes, no, Jupiter speaking on high says, no, my daughter, because Venus is Jupiter's daughter. Don't worry, my decree for your son Aeneas has not changed. He will get to Italy. He will establish Alba Longa, come back to, and that from his descendants will be this great empire of Rome, whose borders will only be the heavens and the oceans. It'll be an empire without end. Don't worry, it will happen. Now, Virgil is writing this as a prophecy, going all the way back to the Trojan War, so around 1200, 1100 BCE. But of course, Virgil writing in the 20s BCE, 1,000 years after the fact, knows the outcome and already is writing in the context of Augustus. So what he does, he places the prophecy of what has already been back there. Julius Caesar is mentioned already as being the one to usher in this new age. Then in Book 6 of the Aeneid, Aeneas has to go to the underworld, just as Odysseus, to find his way back. And he meets his father Anchises there. He's being led through by the Sibyl. And there again, he finds a prophecy. Here's a prophecy from his father Anchises. And they're not only, because they're looking around, they're seeing the shades or the souls, both of dead Romans, but also of Romans to come. And Anchises comes upon and sees the shade of Augustus Caesar. He goes, oh, there he is, the soul. Not yet born. There he is, Augustus Caesar. He will be the one to lead it all. I'll come back to this whole scene in a minute. But the point is, this becomes a prophetic work of the origins and development of Rome. Where did Rome come from? Divine prophecy, divine decree of this eternal empire. Now, it gets also then problematic. So many fun things. I mean, also in Book 2, Aeneas trying to get back, he's shipwrecked in Carthage. Carthage, oh yes, and he kind of falls for Dido, or Dido, but in classical pronunciation, Dido, D-I-D-O, the Queen of Carthage, and they're just having a great time and getting along great, and Dido, in any case, is very much in love, until Venus comes and says, wait a minute, my son, you have to, you have a job to do, and you have a prophecy to fulfill, and you have a destiny that you have to fulfill. You have to get to Italy. You have to lead Dido. And so Aeneas is like, oh, damn, okay, Mom, I will. So Dito's like, no. And Aeneas is like, I gotta go. I'm sorry, bye. And so he leaves, and Dido is so upset. She curses Aeneas for eternity and his descendants, and she kills herself. Now, what does that do? That explains the Punic Wars between Carthage and Rome. It gives an account of it, of why. Now, it's a mythical account. It's a mythical account both in terms of not true, but also in terms of story. You say, isn't that then just disinformation? It's like, well, no, it is doing something different. It is writing an account for which there was no record, and doing so explicitly or consciously in any case as a story to provide the understanding for the time that Virgil is writing and the emergence of Augustus and Augustus's principate and rule as we go through it. Amazing. But we know that Augustus loved the Aeneid. The first 4 books were read to him. He thought this was great. Virgil died in 19 BCE before it was finished. And on his deathbed, it was like, he says, not quite finished yet. And I want it to all be burned. I don't really like it. I think we should get rid of it. But Augustus said, no way in the hell am I going to let this be burned. This is fantastic because it's giving me divine sanction to be the emperor of the world by divine decree. Now, why did Virgil say he wanted it burned? Was it finished? Maybe he realized there's our problems here. Depending on how you read it, you can read the Aeneid not only as praising Caesar, but also, or Augustus Caesar, but as implicitly damning him. It's ambiguous. Is that why Virgil thought maybe it shouldn't get out because of his critique, or was it he wanted to take his critique further? We don't know. We have no idea why. But Augustus, without having read the whole thing, without only having read the first 4 books, preserved it from being burned and destroyed and made it the official history of Rome. Now, in book 6, we go to the underworld with Anchises, when Aeneas and the Sibyl meet the soul of Anchises, who's showing them around. When Anchises sees Augustus, not only does it praise him and give this prophecy, but he says, "Put down your sword now. Be an instrument of peace. Put away your rage. Vengeance, don't worry about. Make peace, not war." I mean, it gets more eloquent than that. But he really is prophesying, saying, don't do this, Roman. You should protect the weak. You should rule for peace. Put down your arms now. And it's kind of like a warning of what was to come. Aeneas doesn't really take it seriously. And then it's like, okay, Virgil says then there are 2 gates exiting the underworld, Gate of Ivory and the Gate of Pearl. And the Gate of Pearl is the gate, he says, through which false shades pass, false souls. The Gate of Ivory is where true shades go into the world. The Sibyl and takes then Anchises take Aeneas and leads them out through the gates of Pearl. The gate of false dreams, as Virgil says. So the whole extent is to what is this whole concept of the Roman Empire's just divinely sanctioned thing whose rule would be of no end, bordered only by the skies and the oceans, a false dream. And as Anchises had exhorted the shades to come, put down your weapons, how then does the Aeneid continue with book 7? Because book 7 begins with Virgil saying, I am starting anew, appealing to the muse. Says, my task now is more difficult. I start kind of a new chapter. It is one of war and struggle and bloodshed. Aeneas does make it to Italian peninsula, Italy, and there is war already going on. He has been told that he meets the Latins, becomes kind of joined up with the Latins, and then their queen Lavinia, whereby and the Etruscans becomes friends, but the Rutuli, some of these other tribes, and especially Turnus, this Rutilian war hero, is trying to take over the Latins and marry Lavinia, the queen. So it comes down to this fight between Aeneas fighting for the Latins, hooked up, combined with the Etruscans against the Rutilians and some of their allies, all for the hand of Lavinia. And the battles continue for a while, and during that battle, Aeneas had become very close to Pallas, who was the son of the king of Etruscans, Evander. And in one of the battles, Turnus killed Pallas, and then took his belt as a victory belt and was wearing this symbol of Pallas whom he had defeated, whom he knew was very close to Aeneas. And it comes down then to kind of single combat, because Turnus and Aeneas say, okay, should we really continue killing each other? Let's just, the two of us, we'll go at it. And the winner take all. The winner gets Lavinia and everything else. Says, okay, so they face off. And Turnus is first, and he throws his javelin, and Aeneas is able to deflect it. And then it's Aeneas' turn, and he throws his javelin and strikes Turnus in the thigh. Turnus is struck. He's down. And Aeneas comes up to him. And Turnus says, okay, Aeneas, you win. Lavinia is yours. You're right. You win. You're the victor. I acknowledge that. But please take my body back to my father so I can have a proper burial. You had a father once, Anchises. Please take my body back to my father. And Aeneas is thinking about it. Book 6, put down your sword, be peaceful. Also, Anchises had said, be merciful. Aeneas, throughout books 7 through 12, rather than Pius Aeneas, because he's called Pius Aeneas throughout, Pius Aeneas as the symbol of Roman piety, the best you could possibly be. But from book 7 on, even more frequently than Pius Aeneas, is Saevus Aeneas, wrathful, vengeful, hateful Aeneas. Saevus Aeneas. So this wrathful, vengeful Aeneas is thinking now about, I did have my father. And he's about ready to say, okay. But then he sees the belt of Pallas that Turnus was wearing, and he says, how dare you, who killed my friend, ask for pity for me. It is Pallas who will strike. It is Pallas' revenge you will get. As he's saying these things, he takes his sword and thrusts it into his heart and chest of Turnus. And Turnus' body falls limp, and his soul goes off to the shades of Hades below. That is how the Aeneid ends. Is that too not a critique? Whereas in book 6, Anchises says, be merciful, be peaceful, to protect the weak. After then going through the gate of false dreams, Aeneas becomes increasingly Saevus, and to the beseeching of Turnus, whom he has defeated clearly, brutally murders him. That's the story of the Aeneid. Now, maybe it wasn't finished, but that's how it ends. And that became the standard view. And even though Augustus only read the first 4 books, that was this concept of what got out there. So was Aeneas then, if he's Saevus, was he also really Pius? What do we do about it? Now, I have a few reflections. You probably have heard the term eternal Rome. That was the last title of the last slide, because that is what is portrayed by Virgil. Virgil created this story of Rome eternal. It wasn't there before. It is part of this Augustan revolution that Virgil created as part of Augustus's propaganda. Eternal Rome, the eternal city, that is all from Virgil. Now, Augustus heard that prophecy in book 1 of the Aeneid from Jupiter. He didn't get to Anchises' prophecy in book 6, but he knew what that was, this eternal empire, this golden age. Pax Romana, golden age, Augustus. He didn't see the whole thing, but it was there. And this dream of eternal empire, since this point, became the basis of the dreams of eternal empires ever since in the West. Now, reflections on the Roman Empire that was established by Augustus's principate. In this whole Augustan revolution, of which Virgil was very much a part, is that the West becomes Roman. Because all of a sudden, this whole concept of Rome, which was far broader with today, a lot of the Roman Empire at the time, today we don't consider Western whatsoever, but we it has become, the West becomes Roman and the Rome becomes Western because it is co-adopted and kind of brought into this understanding of who we are. We are the civilized. Everyone who's not us is part of the barbarians. Who's not a Roman is part of the barbarians. That dichotomy remains, but transformed from the Greeks to the non-Greeks to now to the Romans and non-Romans. We'll see that again later on in lectures about the barbarians, which we'll get there when we get there. But that becomes almost part of the definition of the West, the myth of the West. The myth of Rome becomes the myth of the West. And that was part of the adoption of the Greeks too, with the Greek philosophical aspect and Roman law, Roman government, Roman technology. All these things become part of what makes the West in terms of its understanding of itself and the stories it tells of itself. The dream world of empires, I said, it's there. It has been with us ever since Rome. This dream of establishing an eternal empire throughout the world. And also it points to the relationship between history, memory, and propaganda. So if we can change people's memory, if we can change people's understanding, we can change people. Easy. Change what we teach them as history. Change how they think and what they remember, and we can control them. That recognition begins with Augustus. You can say it's a brilliant recognition, or was a brilliant recognition, even if it was used for perverse purposes, and has been ever since. We can also see there the myth and myth making, and how myth is created. We're talking about these ancient myths that come from nowhere, that's just kind of inherited down. No, they're created, and created often for a purpose. Not necessarily a nefarious purpose. They're telling a story, as I argued before, in terms of expressing a truth, an experienced truth that cannot be expressed in other ways. But they're also stories. Mythos in Greek basically means story, as I said. Virgil is writing a story. Stories shape us and shape how we understand ourselves and our world. And that's what Virgil was trying to do. That's what Augustus was trying to do with his propaganda campaign to transform the mentality, the understanding, the consciousness of Romans to accept him as this ruler that he was. And he was extremely successful. Now, this is just the foundation. We'll be talking about this for the next couple of lectures, I think. Especially because I had already mentioned that by proclaiming Julius Caesar divine, then Augustus could portray himself as the son of a god. It's also during Augustus's reign that another child was born, who would then too be proclaimed as not just the son of a god, but the son of the god. In Virgil's fourth Eclogue, proclaiming and prophesying the birth of a child who would lead in the Golden Age, was seen as prophesizing not Augustus, but this newly born person who would be referred to as the Son of God, who's known as Jesus of Nazareth. It's in this context that we find in the origins and development of Christianity, which we will see becomes fused with the myth of Rome. This will define the myth of the West. We'll get there when we get there. Thank you for your patience. I think the two lectures together have probably gone over a little bit for this one too, especially with the lecture from the first lecture of this week. But I will catch up. You will get your time back. I think I can almost promise that for sure. I will go from there, and thank you for your patience again for the interruption. My apologies. So I will see you again before too long. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.